They towed my tenant's truck at 10 in the morning, broad daylight, like they owned the place. By noon she was in tears, and by 3 I realized this wasn't a mistake, it was a power move. And by the end of that week, I knew one of us was going to learn a very expensive lesson. I own a small commercial building in downtown Asheville, North Carolina. Nothing flashy. Red brick, for stories, built sometime in the 40s. The kind of building that smells faintly like old wood and coffee because there's always somebody brewing something on the second floor. It's not glamorous tech campus real estate, but it's steady. Accountants, a therapist, a graphic designer, one immigration attorney. People who show up every day and pay their rent on time. What makes the building special isn't the brick or the windows. It's the parking lot. 12 spaces. Clean, painted, clearly marked. Metal signs bolted into concrete that read tenant parking only. Violators will be towed. Those spaces are worth almost as much as the building itself because downtown parking in Asheville is a blood sport. If you have dedicated spaces, you don't just own property, you own leverage. For 8 years, there was never an issue. Not one tow. Not one dispute. Everybody respected the lines because the lines were obvious. Then the building next door sold. It used to be an old insurance office, quiet, beige, forgettable. A couple from Seattle bought it, Ethan Caldwell and his wife Marissa. Early 40s, startup money, fast talkers. They paid cash and closed in 2 weeks. Within days there were contractors everywhere, dumpsters out front, guys in hard hats smoking cigarettes on the sidewalk. They were turning it into some kind of co-working tech incubator, exposed brick, glass walls, cold brew on tap, that sort of thing. The first time I met Ethan, he walked over while I was checking on a leaking gutter. Big handshake. Bright smile. The kind of smile that feels practiced. "Hey neighbor," he said, like we'd known each other for years. "Looks like we're going to be working side by side." I nodded, welcomed him to the block. I even walked him along the side of the building and showed him the property line, pointed directly at the 12 parking spaces. "These are mine," I told him. "They're deeded to my parcel. My tenants depend on them." He squinted at the asphalt like he was memorizing it. "Got it," he said. "We'll stay in our lane." I believed him. Maybe that was my first mistake. 3 weeks later, my phone rang around 4:30. It was Carla, the therapist on the second floor. She's calm by profession, steady voice, hard to rattle. That day she was furious. "They took my truck," she said. "What do you mean they took it?" "It's gone. I parked in my spot this morning. I had back-to-back clients all day. I walk out just now, and there's nothing there but a sticker on the pavement." The sticker read Summit Recovery Services, $425 to retrieve your vehicle. $425. I felt something tighten in my chest. Not panic. Not yet. Just irritation that someone had crossed a line. I called the number on the sticker. A man answered on the second ring. Summit Recovery. I explained who I was, gave him the address. He didn't hesitate. "Yeah, that was authorized by the property owner next door," he said. "We were told those spaces belonged to Caldwell Innovation." "I am the property owner," I said slowly. "Those spaces belong to me." There was a pause. Paper shuffling. "Sir," Mr. Caldwell showed us documentation. Survey, parcel map, the whole thing. "We don't just tow on a whim." My jaw tightened. Put him on the phone. 5 minutes later Ethan picked up. "Hey buddy," he said casually. "What's up? You had my tenant's truck towed." A soft laugh. "We needed overflow parking for contractors. Your signs look old." Marissa thought those spots were part of our lot. "Your wife thought wrong," I said. "Those 12 spaces are deeded to my building. You need to call Summit and pay the fee." His tone shifted just enough to notice. "Our survey shows the boundary cuts through part of that strip," he said. "It's not as clear as you think." "It's crystal clear," I replied. "I've owned this building for over a decade." "Well," he said lightly, "if there's confusion, let's let the attorneys figure it out. In the meantime, your tenant can pick up her truck." That was the moment I understood this wasn't confusion. It was strategy. Contractors were filling his renovation site. Street parking was scarce. My 12 empty spaces during business hours looked like an opportunity. And to him, I wasn't a neighbor. I was an obstacle. I paid the $425 that evening because Carla had clients the next morning, and I wasn't going to let her suffer for someone else's ego. But as I drove home, I kept replaying that laugh in my head. "Your signs look old." It wasn't about the signs. It was about territory. The next morning, I pulled the original deed from my files. Then I called my attorney, Daniel Harper. He's in his 60s, gray hair, slow drawl, has handled property disputes longer than Ethan's probably been in business. Daniel reviewed everything, my deed, the original plat map from the county archives, even the easement agreements from the 1950s. He's wrong, Daniel said flatly. Those spaces are entirely within your boundary. There's no ambiguity. So the tow was illegal? Absolutely. It qualifies as conversion and trespass. We'll send a demand letter. The letter went out that afternoon. Cease and desist, reimbursement of fees, confirmation that they would not interfere with my property again. Ethan's attorney responded within 48 hours. Slick letterhead, polite tone, claimed boundary ambiguity, and proposed we split the towing cost as a gesture of good faith while the matter was clarified. Split the cost of my own parking lot. I stared at that line longer than I should have. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about precedent. If I gave an inch, even symbolically, I'd be negotiating ownership of something I already owned. Daniel filed suit. And that's when things escalated. Over the next month, more vehicles were towed from my lot. Each time, Summit Recovery showed up within hours of someone parking there. It was surgical, intentional. My tenants were anxious. They'd call me before leaving work just to confirm their cars were still there. The atmosphere in the building shifted. People whispered in hallways. One tenant quietly asked if he should start looking for office space elsewhere. I covered every towing fee, over $1,600 in total. Not because I had to, but because loyalty matters, and I wasn't going to let Ethan turn my tenants into collateral damage. I called him again after the fourth tow. This stops now, I said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Then win in court, he replied. Until then, we're operating under our survey. And that's when something in me changed. Not anger, not revenge, just clarity. If he wanted to play leverage, I needed a better piece on the board. I didn't go to the courthouse the next day. I didn't storm into Ethan's half-renovated tech palace and flip over a reclaimed wood table either. Instead, I drove out to the edge of town where Summit Recovery Services kept their trucks. It wasn't some glossy corporate headquarters. It was a gravel lot behind a chain-link fence, 2 tow trucks parked crooked, a small office that looked like it had survived 3 different decades without committing to any of them. A faded Mountain Dew sign hung in the window. There was a pit bull sleeping in the shade near the door. A man stepped out when I pulled up. Late 30s, ball cap, grease on his forearm. Solid build. The kind of guy who fixes his own engine because he doesn't trust anyone else to do it right. You lost another one? He asked. No, I said. I'm the landlord from Ash Street. His posture shifted. Not defensive exactly, just cautious. Look, he said before I could speak. We only tow when we're authorized. I know, I replied. That's why I'm here. His name was Travis Monroe. He'd bought Summit from his uncle 5 years earlier. 2 trucks, 3 drivers, including himself, a handful of standing contracts with apartment complexes and private lots. It wasn't a gold mine. It was survival. We stepped inside his office. The air smelled like old coffee and rubber. Papers stacked everywhere. A whiteboard with unpaid invoices scribbled in red. I'm not trying to make your life harder, I told him. But those 12 spaces belong to me. My attorney confirmed it. The court will confirm it. You're towing vehicles that have every legal right to be there. He rubbed the back of his neck. Caldwell showed us a survey, he said. Stamped, signed. Said there was a boundary overlap. We can't play referee. If the property owner calls, we respond. Did you verify with the county? He hesitated. That told me enough. We don't have the manpower to run title searches every time somebody disputes a line, he said. Fuel's up, insurance is killing us. We take contracts where we can. There it was. This wasn't about siding with Ethan. It was about staying afloat. How's business? I asked. He gave a short laugh. You really want to know? Some months were fine. Some months I'm deciding which bill waits. Diesel's not cheap. Neither are lawsuits. You ever think about getting out? He looked at me like I'd just asked if he wanted to give away his dog. This is my family's company, he said. But yeah, sometimes. We talked another 20 minutes. I didn't threaten him. I didn't accuse him. I just listened. The rising costs. The constant complaints. The reality that one serious lawsuit could wipe him out. On the drive back downtown, a thought kept circling in my mind. Not revenge. Not sabotage. Control. Ethan's leverage depended entirely on Summit continuing to act on his calls. Remove that, and the entire strategy collapsed. 2 days later, I called Travis. What would it take for you to sell? I asked. Silence. You serious? Dead serious. Trucks, contracts, equipment, everything. He named a number that was lower than I expected. 95,000. I countered at 80. We met at 87.5. I didn't haggle him into the dirt. That wasn't the point. The point was certainty. I pulled money from a line of credit I'd barely touched in years. Signed the papers. Assumed the insurance policies. Kept Travis and his drivers on payroll at slightly higher rates than before. When the ink dried, Summit Recovery Services belonged to me. I didn't announce it. I didn't post about it. I didn't even tell my tenants yet. The first thing I did was audit every tow from my property. Then I wrote checks reimbursing every single tenant who had paid a fee. I hand-delivered them, one by one. Carla stared at hers. You didn't have to do this, she said. Yes, I did, I replied. You pay rent for peace of mind. That includes your parking space. The relief in that building was palpable. Shoulders loosened. Conversations got lighter. Word travels fast in small offices, and loyalty travels even faster. The second thing I did was review Summit's contracts. Ethan's agreement was month to month. Termination clause required written notice. No penalties. I drafted the letter myself before having Daniel review it. Effective immediately, Summit Recovery Services would no longer provide towing services for Caldwell Innovation. Any future requests regarding Ash Street would be declined due to verified boundary clarification. I mailed it certified. Then I replaced the signage in my parking lot. Same bold lettering. Same metal posts. Tenant parking only. Unauthorized vehicles will be towed by Summit Recovery Services. Call this number. The same number Ethan had been using. Only now, when it rang to my office. 3 days passed. On the fourth morning, a white contractor van pulled into one of my 12 spaces. It wasn't subtle. It was deliberate. I watched from my second-floor window as the driver climbed out, glanced at the sign, and shrugged. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. Summit Recovery. I answered evenly. A confused pause. Yeah. We need a tow at Caldwell Innovation. Same address as usual. Who's calling? Ethan Caldwell. Of course it was. Mr. Caldwell, I said calmly. This is Thomas Reed. Silence. Then what? You're speaking to the owner of Summit Recovery Services. The line went so quiet I could hear traffic through his receiver. You're joking. I'm not. A sharp exhale. You bought the towing company? Yes. That's insane. Business is business, I replied. We reviewed the property records. Those 12 spaces are not within your boundary. We will not tow vehicles from property that doesn't belong to you. You can't just... I can't, I said gently. It's my company. He hung up without another word. For a moment, I stood there staring at the phone, not triumphant, not gloating, just steady. I hadn't broken a rule. I hadn't cut corners. I had simply removed the lever he'd been using against me. That afternoon, he marched into my building unannounced. Marissa was with him, heels clicking sharply against the tile. This is harassment, she said before I could speak. You're weaponizing a service provider to retaliate against us. I folded my hands on my desk. I purchased a local business that was struggling, I said. I corrected improper tows. I terminated a month-to-month contract. Which part is harassment? Ethan leaned forward. You're trying to choke our operations. No, I replied. I'm protecting my property. His jaw tightened. He wasn't used to resistance. You could see it. He was accustomed to fast deals, quick leverage, people folding under pressure. Fine, he said finally. We'll see what the judge says. And that's when I realized something else. This wasn't about parking for him anymore. It was about pride. By the time we reached the courtroom 2 months later, the air between our buildings felt different. Quieter. No more contractor vans drifting into my lot. No more anxious calls from tenants asking if their cars were still there. The tension had settled into something colder, more contained, like two neighbors who wave politely but keep mental notes. Ethan stopped looking at me when we passed on the sidewalk. Marissa wore sunglasses even on cloudy days, which felt symbolic somehow. Court was scheduled for a Thursday morning. Buncombe County Courthouse, 3rd floor, fluorescent lights that hummed just enough to make everything feel slightly unreal. Daniel sat beside me flipping through a thin binder. He wasn't worried. That helped. Across the aisle, Ethan and his attorney whispered in tight, clipped tones. He looked different without the construction crew and startup buzz behind him. Smaller, or maybe just less certain. When our case was called, we stood. The judge, A woman in her late 50s with sharp eyes and very little patience for theatrics reviewed the filings. Daniel presented first. Clean, methodical. Deed. Original plat map. County survey records. Photographs of the signage. Documentation of every tow. Every receipt I'd reimbursed. Every certified letter. Then Ethan's attorney argued reasonable boundary confusion, referenced their commission survey, implied that I had escalated the matter by acquiring Summit Recovery in bad faith. That word hung in the air. Bad faith. The judge leaned back slightly. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, looking over her glasses, "did you verify the county plat before authorizing the initial tow?" Ethan hesitated. It was subtle, but it was there. "We relied on our surveyor," he said. "That wasn't my question," she replied evenly. Silence. "No," he admitted. And after receiving written notice from Mr. Reed's attorney clarifying ownership, he shifted his weight. "We believe the matter was still under dispute." "Belief," she said, "is not the same as legal entitlement." There was no dramatic gavel slam. No theatrical speech. Just clarity. The judge ruled that the 12 parking spaces were unequivocally within my property boundary. The initial tow was unauthorized. The subsequent tows, conducted after formal notice, constituted willful interference. She ordered Caldwell Innovation to reimburse all towing fees, court costs, and attorney fees. A little over $14,000 in total. When she finished, Ethan stared straight ahead. Not at me. Not at the judge. Just forward, like he was trying to process how something so small had grown so large. Outside the courtroom, he finally spoke. "You could have just talked to us," he said. I looked at him for a long moment. "I did," I replied. He didn't answer. That should have been the end of it. Clean. Legal. Final. But real life doesn't wrap itself in bows. Over the next few weeks, word spread. Downtown business owners talk. Property managers gossip. Contractors share stories over lunch. The narrative wasn't just that Ethan lost a boundary dispute. It was that he tried to strong-arm a neighbor and got outmaneuvered. Some people thought what I did was brilliant. Others thought it was ruthless. One cafe owner pulled me aside and said, "Buying the towing company? That's cold, man." Maybe it was. But here's the part nobody sees from the outside. There were nights during that whole ordeal when I lay awake wondering if I'd gone too far. Not legally. Not strategically. Personally. I've always believed in being a good neighbor. In shaking hands and keeping your word. When Ethan first smiled and said, "We'll stay in our lane," I wanted to believe him. I wanted this to be simple. But there's a difference between being kind and being passive. If I'd folded, if I'd split the towing fees or quietly accepted temporary confusion, what message would that have sent? To my tenants. To myself. That ownership is negotiable if someone pushes hard enough. No. The towing company purchase wasn't revenge. It was insulation. It was making sure no one could weaponize a third party against me again. And here's the twist that still surprises people. About 6 months after the ruling, Ethan requested a meeting. Not a confrontation. A meeting. We sat in my office, same desk, same window overlooking the lot that started it all. He looked tired. Less polished. The tech incubator had launched, but growth was slower than projected. Investors were asking questions. Construction costs had run over budget. "I miscalculated," he said finally. "About the boundary?" I asked. "About you." I didn't respond. "I thought you'd cave," he admitted. "Most small property owners do. It's easier than fighting." There it was. The assumption underneath everything. He hadn't seen me as a neighbor. He'd seen me as manageable. "I wasn't trying to start a war," he continued. "We just needed parking during renovation. It spiraled. It spiraled," I said quietly. "When you decided your need outweighed my ownership." He nodded once. Not arguing. Just absorbing it. We didn't become friends after that. This isn't one of those stories. But something shifted. A year later, when a delivery truck accidentally blocked my loading zone, Ethan sent one of his staff over to help redirect traffic without me even asking. Small gesture. Quiet acknowledgement. Sometimes consequences teach what conversations can't. And Summit Recovery? It's still running. Travis manages day-to-day operations. The business is steadier now, more selective about contracts. We verify ownership before towing from private lots. No shortcuts. Funny enough, buying that company ended up being one of the better investments I've made. Not because it hurt someone, but because it closed a vulnerability I didn't know I had. So here's the question I keep coming back to. Was it too much? Some people say I escalated unnecessarily, that I could have waited for the court and saved the $87,000. Others say if someone plays games with your livelihood, you finish the game decisively. I know how I justify it. I protected my tenants. I defended my property. I operated within the law. But I also know this. There's a thin line between strategic and spiteful, and everyone draws it in a different place. If you were in my position, would you have done the same thing? Would you have fought it strictly in court and absorbed the stress? Or would you have taken control of the lever being used against you? I'm genuinely curious where that line sits for you. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Was this justice or overkill? And if you've ever dealt with a neighbor who mistook kindness for weakness, I want to hear that story too. Because sometimes the real lesson isn't about parking spaces or towing companies. It's about knowing when to stay patient and when to make your move.